night, everybody. I am the Professor Rafael Villa from the University of São Paulo. On behalf of NUPRI, Center for Research in International Relations, I would like to say that we are very pleased with the release of Ignacio Cardone books, what had by title The Antarctic Politics of Brazil, where the tropic meet the pole. The release of Vinicius books is jointly organized between the Department of Political Science at USP, the Institute of International Relations at USP, and Brazil Institute at King College. I am sure the book will soon become one of the main references of Brazilian policies toward Antarctica. And I would like to thank very much in first place the participation of Ignacio Cardone. Ignacio is PhD by the Institute of International Relations at USP and the King College. And Ignacio was recently hired, contracted by the Pontificia Católica University of Lima, Peru, or PUC Lima, as we say it in Portuguese. And I thank so much by the comment by Dr. Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho, International Vice Dean of the Faculty of Social Science in Public Policy, and Director of King's Brazil Institute in Reader at the Department of World Studies. Vinicius, who is our big partner, together the Professor Anthony Pereira in the King College. Thank you, Vinicius. And I thank so much to Dr. Daniela Portella Sampaio, PhD from the Institute of International Relations at USP, who is also a big specialist in Antarctic politics. He currently associate research at Biofield University in United Kingdom. Thank you very much, everybody, and to start and coordinate the work, I will give the floor to Ignacio Cardone. Daniela, you're welcome. and thank you. And to start and coordinate the work, I will give the floor to Ignacio Cardone, who will start giving a panoramic about your book. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and thank for your introduction to this event and for all your support along the road, which has been key for getting here. I would like also to thank all joining us today in YouTube. I'm very glad and very proud to be presenting my work, The Antarctic Politics of Brazil, Where the Tropic Meets the Pole, published by Bogger Macmillan. My most sincere appreciation to the University of São Paulo and King's College London for hosting this event, and to Thiago Babo for putting it together and being behind the comment this evening. Also, my deepest gratitude to the two great academics that accepted to comment the book and are joining us today, Dr. Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho and Daniela Sampaio. I really hope you have enjoyed reading the book. We get that later on. I will now give a very brief introduction to the book, describing the idea behind it, the process of research, its structure, and some very general remarks. I will do my best in keeping it within 10 minutes so as to give room to the comments. I will then be followed by the comments of Dr. Carvalho and Dr. Sampaio. And after that, if there is any comment or questions from the audience, I will be more than happy to address them. So please, if you have any question, write it down in the YouTube chat, which is below the video. Now, this book was driven by the question about why Brazil got involved in Antarctica. Mainly, I wanted to understand why countries such as Brazil, which traditionally have looked to the interior of the American continent, started to look south, and how that involvement took shape and structure what we could call a Brazilian Antarctic policy. In other words, what I wanted to do is to understand how that connection between the tropic and the pole took shape. So realizing that the field of Brazilian Antarctic history was almost completely vacant, at least from the academic field, I decided to develop a systematic and comprehensive work that could give a first glance to that history from an analytical and academic point of view based on the international relations. Dr. Sampaio, here with us tonight, have closely collaborated to give shape to the idea, which ended up in a proposal that resembles in great extent to the content and the structure of the book. So I'm really indebted to Dr. Sampaio for those contributions in that early stages of the project. Now, the research process was quite bumpy. I started it as a side project while I was doing my PhD research. And when I addressed it as my main project during my postdoctoral work, the COVID-19 pandemic broke out. So to the lack of any funding, I had to add the closure of all archives and libraries, which limited my access to primary and secondary sources. As outcome, I had to cancel my planned fieldwork in Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia, and Itajaí. Luckily for me, at least, the great work of digitalization developed by the Arquivos Nacionais and the Biblioteca Nacional of Brazil, the Center of Documentation, the CPDoc of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and the Interministerial Committee for Maritime Resources, the CIRM of the Brazilian Navy, allowed me to access primary sources of great value for the book. Nonetheless, it was not a straightforward process, and it was a great challenge, as there is no special collection or catalog regarding Antarctica, which demanded from me an intensive work of reading and prospective the archives. Anyway, I finally managed to navigate through those challenges and came up with the manuscript, which after a few alterations asked by the editors was published. The book ended up having 6 chapters, which I will present briefly right now. The first chapter, by way of introduction, Brazilian geopolitical thinking on Antarctica, assessed the role that Antarctica had within the geopolitical works developed in Brazil. In that regard, my intention here was to invert the usual logic of highlighting the works that tackles the geopolitical importance of Antarctica, and instead try to figure out up to which point Antarctica played any relevant role within the Brazilian geopolitical thinking. As general conclusion of the chapter, I put it that in general, with the notable exception of Teresinha de Castro's frontier theory and some developments of General Meira Matos, Antarctica held a rather marginal role within geopolitical considerations developed in Brazil, which in some way also explains the role that the white continent had in its foreign policy. The second chapter, a prelude to a Brazilian Antarctic policy, covers the early expression of interest in Brazil in the Antarctic question since the second half of the 1950s, when it started to appear, those interests, to the access of Brazil to the Antarctic Treaty in 1975. Here, the emphasis is given to the changing role of Brazil in the international realm, especially the upgraded expectations of Brazil in becoming an international player, a relevant international player, after the Second World War, the impact of Castro's frontage theory in the approach of the country to Antarctica, the impact of first proposal for an Antarctic expedition put forward by the Brazilian Institute of Antarctic Research, which would be the IBIA, the limits imposed by the development or the limited development of the Brazilian scientific system at the middle of the 20th century, and the role that the conflict with Argentina regarding the Itaipu Dam project had in delaying an active involvement of Brazil, at least officially, with the Antarctic. The third chapter, When the Tropic Met the Pole, covers the history of the search of Brazil for consultative status, that is, to obtain active participation within the Antarctic regime. The organization of its first expedition and the process of establishment of its permanent presence in the White Continent, what was completed in 1986 when the Comandante Ferraz station was started to allow people to winter there. Here, the focus is again on the role of the IBIA, the Brazilian Institute for Antarctic Studies, the role of the Navy in promoting the first official expedition of Brazil, the international conditions, especially regarding pressures over the Antarctic regime, which favored Brazil's accession as consultative party jointly with India, and the impact of other international events such as the Malvinas War. The fourth chapter, The Rise of the Newcomers, assesses the period that goes from discussions over natural resources in Antarctica up to the decade that followed the end of the Cold War, the Antarctic mining ban of the Madrid Protocol, and the process of redemocratization in Brazil. What is noted here is the change in the discourse, the alliances, and the emphasis of Brazil on what regarded its Antarctic politics. After the 1990s, what is more relevant is the emphasis given to science, despite some other developments and other factors determined some financial stabilities that led the program to some important strains and conflicts. The fifth, which is the final historical chapter, Science and Environment at the Center Stage, analyze the history of Brazilian involvement in Antarctica since the beginning of the 21st century, including the important changes experienced in the Brazilian Antarctic program, especially through a more systematic and strategic approach to its scientific research. This was, in a way, it was accompanied by important investment in the program by the government, especially since the involvement of the Ministry of Environment within the program. The participation or the decision to participate in the International Polar Year, which demanded important investment, and the creation of two National Institutes of Science and Technology specialized in Antarctic studies. However, there are also other development or challenges which are also assessed, especially financial instabilities of the program, the wrathful fire of the Brazilian station, Comandante Ferraz, and the current attacks to science and research in general by the current Brazilian government. At last, the sixth chapter presents some general conclusions, some of which I will present here. Now, first of all, it is important to highlight that Antarctica had a relatively marginal geopolitical importance to Brazil, and that the country always followed what we could characterize as a pragmatical and thoughtful approach. Second, the economic interests have been prevalent, and it appears even behind some environmental concerns. Flexibility and economy of resources have also been characteristic of the Brazilian involvement in Antarctica in a very, very smart policy in terms of the active participation. Third, the Brazilian approach to Antarctica has been structured by the relevance or this pivotal role played by the Navy, by the Brazilian Navy, determining a predominant maritime character with emphasis on the physical presence. Also, relevance obtained by the scientific program, especially after 1990, have allowed Brazil to obtain international prominence within the Antarctic community and consolidated as a very well-regarded and developed program. But with all, limitation in funding and recent policies throw a shadow over the future Brazil Antarctic science, and with it to the Brazil's presence in the continent. So it's not everything so clear at this point. Well, I will leave it there, and now I will give the word to the commentators. We will start with Dr. Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho, Vice Dean International of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Public Policy, Director of King's University Institute and Reader of the Department of War Study, King's College London, followed by the comments of Dr. Daniela Portella Sampaio, Research Associate of Bielefeld University. Dr. Carvalho, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. It's a great honor to be here sharing this screen with you all. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable because actually I am not an expert in Antarctica geopolitics indeed. It's not exactly what I am researching and doing. But I'm very confident and calm because I have Daniela and you there. So it's being in between you both, people will not pay so much attention to what I will say here. I will be looking at your work and following your research as well from the time you have been here at King's with us and developing part of your PhD studies. Also the work that you have done, and I work together with you to the article to the NATO Journal for Strategic Communication addressing some issues related to this topic as well. So my look at your book will be a look and a reading of a reviewer, let's put in these terms. And as a good reviewer, I will try to highlight some elements that for me, they were really very relevant and really important points. I will also, as all good review, or at least pretending to be a good review, I will point out some aspects that were for me a little bit still not so clear and provoke you in the end with some questions that I think could be a good continuation for the reflection about this book. So I'm making this disclaimer initially just to let me turn off the heat in here because it's burning my back. Yeah. Okay, now it's fine. Yeah. Making the disclaimer, let's go to the book properly speaking. First of all, congratulations for the immense work you have done here. Looking at the literature about Brazil in Antarctica, I think Daniela has a fantastic repertoire of work on this field. And I think you are consolidating more and more as another scholar, great scholar in this field. A field that is still not well developed, in the sense that we don't have a lot of people looking at Antarctica from a perspective of geopolitics, or perhaps even if we could call oceanopolitics, as the former Navy Commander Admiral Wilkes used to refer to what is aspect of the politics of the ocean, no? And I think your work helps a lot to really be, I think it become a seminal work for anyone who studies Antarctica and Brazil in Antarctica now. It's very comprehensive historically. You made a tour de force to encompass in a simple book, a history that dates back from basically the end of 19th century. And you did that in a very fluent way of writing. It was good and easy to read your book, not because the content was easy, but because you managed to do that in a way that we could enjoy a lot reading your book. And I congratulate you for that very much. It's not so easy to do that in academic writing, and you managed to do a fantastic, fluent text in your book. Another important element is, as I said, I'm not an expert in Antarctica, but I study strategy, maritime strategy, Brazilian strategy, and geopolitics in general as well. And I constantly am talking to colleagues here with you. I have done that already. How important it is for us to establish and consolidate a scholarship in strategic studies or international relations. Well, we don't know exactly which field it is at, but in a field that we will bring to the political arena these discussions of Brazilian engagement with Antarctica, because as we can see, and you show that very well, that has been almost a situation of opportunities than a very clear and direct and oriented plan. So that comes my first question here. You said that it's not clear at this point what will be the politics for Brazil in Antarctica. My question is, when it was, reading your book, I had the impression that it was never a really politics to Antarctica. Things happen, and then shouldn't we need to make a politics about that? We need to make sense of what's happening here. Some technological development came, let's include that. But it was not a priori thought about what we want to Antarctica. So that's is the provocation, the first provocation I want to put to you here. So when it was that we had one. So why to say that now it's not clear at this point? Are we not just going into the same path ever and ever? And looking at your book as well, we can say, well, even doing that, we managed to do something. We managed to have a base there. We managed to be part of the Antarctica Treaty. We managed to do field work there, research, even without a base, when the base burned, when the Comandante Ferraz burned. So that's amazing to look as well. Oh, and then we can compare with some other programs of Brazil, programs that has been carried on, programs with geopolitical impact that have been carried on with a very hard approach, like the nuclear program in Brazil, that in some ways goes in the same direction. Lack of resources there in a government, some resources in another one. We need to develop some skills here. We need to develop someone there, and we don't have here. We need to bring somewhere else. So it seems to me that your book, and here I'm expanding what I think is the collaboration for a larger thinking on geopolitics in Brazil. I think your book is pointing out what probably is a serious issue that the country needs to think very seriously as well. It's the lack of a grand strategy. And again, I insist, when we talk about grand strategy, Brazilians tend to listen to that and translate as grande estratégia, as a big thing, as a superlative thing. We will dominate the world. No, it's not that grand strategy. It's a more comprehensive strategy. It's more, in Portuguese, I would translate a ampla estratégia, less than a big one. So I think your book, talking about specifically the geopolitics for Antarctica, is showing how much Brazil engage in global geopolitical discussions or actions as well, more sometimes by force of accident than by deliberate grand strategic decision. And that's an important necessity to be discussed in Brazil. And then comes another important aspect that your book is bringing, and can be seminal again, and I say that in continuation or in cooperation with the work, as the Daniela Sampaio's work as well, is in a few years we will have again a rediscussion about the Antarctica Treaty. And we cannot make these decisions 2 years before. We cannot discuss that 2 years before. There are quite a lot of things in the plate of the geopolitics of Antarctica today, in a complex world that is quite different from a bipolar Cold War period, with much more elements of discussion, and even this aspect of the environmental much more clear, understood than it was when we signed the first Antarctica Treaty. So if we don't start right now, we will improvise again, as has been this politics for quite a long time, and you showed very well in your book. So I think it's an important provocation that you are making to us all with your book now. And as I said, it's a scholarship that, combined with those scholarship, consolidate already in the field, the few one, but important one. And again, I mentioned Daniela because it is an important scholar in this field. I think you both have this big, you can be proud of it, because you are bringing to the arena one discussion that must be start. We are probably already late, but we need to start very soon. What we want with Antarctica, what we want with that. So that criticism that I said that I would do is like, sometimes your book, it's quite oh, it could be like that. It's a shame that was not like this. A little bit sad, in the sense of almost saying what was not there. But at the same time, you are saying what was there. And that's, as I said, the amazing and interesting aspect of it that called my attention a lot. And then there are one or two points that I would go directly in the text and provoke him more. One of those, I notice a gap that I think we should not neglect it. Is the gap, you mentioned the Diretoria de Hidrografia e Navegação of the Brazilian Navy, the Directorate of Hydrography and Navigation, only once in the book, in an almost surprise element when you, in your note number 66, you say that the first Navy people involved or engaged with the discussion of Antarctica were from the Directorate of Hydrography and Navigation in the Navy. You know? And I'm saying that because I am a honorary hydrographer of the Brazilian Navy. No, that's the badge of them. And I'm saying that because it's the natural house inside the Navy to look at the Antarctica issues. It's there that the fleet of ships, Antarctic survey ships, are there. Ari Rongel, Massimiliano, the Barão de Tefé, the old Barão de Tefé, well, all of them were from this directorate. It is a directorate responsible for cartography, for any sort of aspects of navigation, and it's a sort of house of oceanographic science inside the Navy as well. So I noticed this gap there and say, well, we should put more effort in looking what they have done, and they are constantly doing there as well. Then another aspect that's really I want to provoke you, because at some point back there in the end of your book, let me go exactly page 240 of your book. I'm in doubt about that, and I want you to explain to me what you mean with that, because you said that looking ahead, you said that the absence of a constituted field of Antarctica humanities and social sciences will certainly continue. Yeah, I just would like to ask you what you are calling here humanities to Antarctica, because looking at the Britannica, the encyclopedia, they said humanities include the study of language, literatures, art, history, and philosophy. And so are you talking about a man of Antarctica that produces a humanities? Social science, I see that because of the geopolitics, of course, because of all this discussion, but where is the humanities in the sense of Antarctica? Like how we situate these humanities here in this context of Antarctica. That's one provocation that I want to put to you in this book. And I just want to conclude with another point that you mentioned in the book, and probably it would be interesting to see it more connected as well. You mentioned the Blue Amazon at one point there, but you locate Blue Amazon much earlier than it was first announced. The concept of Blue Amazon is something very recent in the history of Brazilian Navy and the oceanopolitics of the Brazilian Navy. And then you mentioned that back, I think you are mentioning about that in the 60s already, when nobody would talk about Blue Amazon as the concept it is today. I published a text about that in the same journal you did, in the NATO Strategic Communication 1, exploring exactly this concept and the relevance of it, not only as a strategic communication tool, but again, as a declaration of a grand strategy, probably, and the Antarctica, how it fits together with this Blue Amazon. And that's what I think also you have space to develop that more. Obviously, we cannot go back to the books and do that, but probably these things that I'm telling you here can be, again, as I said, things that your book seed as further discussions that we can still have on the topic of geopolitics of Antarctica. And I would finish here my comments on your work, congratulating you again for that. And I'm very, very proud of the work that you have done. It is a massive work under the conditions that you had to do it. And a fantastic source, I would say a basic book for anyone studying Antarctica from a Brazilian perspective. and a very important contribution as well for the oceanopolitics and for a grand strategy thinking in Brazil. So I stop here, and I will leave to Daniela that for sure will say things much more important and relevant that I have said here. Thank you so much, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Vinicius. So now, Daniela, if you want to join us with your comments, I will give the floor to you.
Okay, I hope everybody is hearing me well. Good. Also, good evening, everyone. I imagine that will be almost evening in Brazil. So first of all, many thanks. I almost are going to echo what Vinicius has just said, but for me, it's like I'm not an expert of strategic studies or geopolitics. So I was like, I'm an expert of Antarctic treaty and Antarctic governance, so I'll be like probably providing a different angle, different perspective. So I'm here very humble as well, in the position that I was when I got the book and I was reading, I was like, okay, so this is the perspective that I was a little bit mixed with myself being an analyst and understanding Antarctic governance at the same time as a Brazilian, and following the history of how my country was the relationship that it established with the Antarctic. So first of all, I want to congratulate Ignacio. Like, what an amazing work! Almost a natural talent for archives and archivists. So I was absolutely gobsmacked by the amount of reference in terms of archives, documents, literature, media, and as Vinicius said, in such a long spectrum of time, starting from like late 19th, early 20th century, and going through like almost now, like this year now, it's so up to date. So congratulations for the massive work you have done in terms of research. Is amazing. The second thing that I want to congratulate you, it's so well written. So it was so pleasant and easy to read, and I agree with Vinicius as well. It's very tricky to try to find a way of wording so much history, so much information, and giving this flow, because we were reading. It's an academic work, but it's very enjoyable. It's very, very well written, and I felt for the first time when I was reading and revisiting the history of Brazilian Antarctic politics, it's like, oh, now I make sense of things, because it really takes the reader through all the time, and so really well done. I congratulate you for that. And I wanted something that for me, I wanted to start at like how amazed I was with the depth of your research, because you mentioned like the conditions in the preface, like because of COVID and the difficulties with regards to access all this information. But if you haven't said, I would not say there was any difficulty in the work, because it's so complete. And what amazed me is the information you mentioned about the first Brazilian to be in Antarctica was a woman. And then I was like, wow, that's amazing. And I did not know, and I think it's not like a general knowledge. And you mentioned about then the role of Terezinha de Castro, who is also a woman. So I was thinking, oh, that is a gender revisitation in terms of Brazilian Antarctic politics. So I think that's another sign of your work. And now getting to more the details, for me as someone who understands about the Antarctic Treaty governance, for me, I felt like that you mirror the reader. So instead of looking at the history of Antarctic governance in terms of the instruments that we have, actually we're seeing through a country that was first outside and then is brought to the system. So I think it was very, very, very good and very, very intelligent the way you have done to give us a history of the Antarctic Treaty System, but through the lens of the outsider that is brought to the inside of the system. And for me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but my impression was that you started first very geopolitics, so like giving the history of the geographical and the Brazilian geopolitics and how this combined with the Antarctic. Then, as that was my impression, as the geopolitics start not to be that relevant, the institutional history becomes more relevant. So you go through this passage of geopolitics to the institutional footprints, and that it was amazing. Following how the different bodies and how the different machinery in Brazil changed. For instance, in Itamaraty, when you said our first was in international organizations, and then it passed to be the division of the sea, Antarctic, and space, and how this institutional history tells us how Brazil was dealing with the Antarctic. And then at the end, you get back to geopolitics, because when you establish your criticism about how we were still, and then again, that's the slip of the tongue. I'm putting myself as a Brazilian, but when we are putting so much relevance to the physical aspect of the physical presence of Brazil and not necessarily the political actions of Brazil. So then you get like a turn back to geopolitics, because again, you're talking about the physical presence and other implications of this materiality of Brazil in Antarctica that not necessarily follows a strategy or a vision, a Brazilian vision to Antarctic. It's much more material than a vision. And then, but for me, like I would say that the chapter 3 was my favorite. I don't know if it's because how Brazil was steering to the pathway to get to the consultative status. And what is curious, that this is something that is coming back now when we think about the Antarctic discussions. What are the criteria that you would allow someone from outside to come to the club? So we have discussions, I think, last publications about how much is the scientific criteria, how much building as a research station is relevant today, because you get this kind of contradiction in the Antarctic Treaty System. If you're trying to protect the environment, but the way that you protect the environment is causing some form of harm to the environment by being there. And the idea that those that need to join, they cannot be there. So that for me was what was like striking in your book, the presence and the absence, and the presence that provokes some damage, but at the same time is the presence that brings some salvation, some protection to the environment because you understand it. And then I was very, there were 2 points that for me was very interesting. It's when you were comparing the trajectory from India, that you say like, oh, it was quite similar to the Brazilian one, but there was a point that they depart. So that was the first thing that I wanted to ask you. In your impression and in your research, do you think that the Brazilian trajectory has any parallel with other trajectories that you have come like through, or in the fact that, and I love the way that Vinicius mentioned this, the impression that I have that Brazil is a politics of improvisation, of intuition, but not necessarily as a plan that as I completely agree. The impression that what I learned from the book is that the country responds to what happens, and in this way, maybe and again we have been very competent because we have responded in a way that we are there. But then again, provoked by your book, how much Brazil was actually there because it was luck, it was like circumstances, or actually Brazil was an instrument of legitimation of the system because it was outside when there were criticisms about the system, and then it was brought inside as an emerging economy from a developing country without having a claim. So how much actually it's, in your impression, it's Brazil's success, is Brazil's results, like it comes from its effort, or actually Brazil is very instrumentalized in that system, and basically because we have been improvising for so many years, we need to count with luck to keep building this Antarctic history. So that was one of the points that I wanted to ask you. Another thing that I was curious, and forgive me if I missed, it's when you're mentioning about contar and as this body that translates the decisions that are made from the treaty to the domestic policy. And then something that I was curious about is because Brazil is one of the few parties from the treaty that hasn't ratified the last decisions. There are still not the measures that are still not ratified. There are the liabilities, so Annex 6, and 2 measures with regards to tourism. That is still there, but they have not been ratified. And Brazil is one of the few that hasn't done anything for the last 17 years. So how, like, did you get into more details about how is this process of once Brazil is there and it's and then it comes back to Brasilia, what happens and how things that are decided that translated to the domestic? I was very curious about it. Then another point that I wanted to ask is when you mentioned that there's not an interest, I think it's in chapter 4, if I'm not mistaken. There's not an interest in the knowledge per se when Brazil starts to like give more privilege to science, but more for knowledge for development. So this combination of our development concern that we need to develop as a nation, and the knowledge in Antarctica just fights for that. How are Brazilian science again so instrumental, or actually there is a space for a knowledge per knowledge, a science per science? And the last thing that I was very interested is how you put the economic factors so important to Brazilian, how it built its interest about the region. But then the funniest thing is that in Antarctica, everything that is economic is a little bit, you should avoid, because you don't want to get into the difficult questions about ownership, sovereignty, property, division of profit. How Brazil presents itself as a paradox of being interested economically in a place that pushes economy out. So these are all the questions that come to my mind when I was reading, and again, I thought like if you ended brilliantly talking about getting back to geopolitics. So we do this detour in the book, and it was a pleasant to read. So like, congratulations for the amazing work. It was the thing that I really hope that the book is going to be translated to Portuguese, because I think that Brazilian audience needs to read it, definitely. And I hope that the translation keeps the same flow. I hope you will be able to do it, because yeah, it was very, very good. So informative, so provocative, and really, really well done.
Well, thank you, Daniela. Thank you again to both of you, Vinicius and Daniela, for your comments. I will now try to address your question and your comments. Hope to I have taken some notes, so I hope to go through all of them briefly, at least. So Vinicius, when you said about if there is any key difference now with the cycles of not knowing where we are heading with Antarctica, I mostly agree with you. Why I'm making explicit the idea that there is no clear direction right now is because when you see the media, there is this big announcement of Brazil is going to build the first polar ship within Brazil, or we have inaugurated. I mean, it's amazing. The new Comandante Forest Station, it's incredible. I will not doubt that. I have the honor to visit it, and it's incredible. But at the same time, it needs to be recognized that there are some limits to that. What is different right now, and probably we didn't have that since the 1990s, is the crisis that the scientific system as a whole it is confronting right now in Brazil. And this is important, and that is something I said in the book, because we have right now a strong Antarctic scientific program. I mean, leaders of the research programs right now are really well-regarded scientists. They have people who are really well-trained and know the field, know what they are doing. But what will happen in 10 years' time when, the guys that are not staying in Brazil, or they are not getting funds for doing their research, supposed to continue the work of those leaders today? I'm not sure. So that's the new issue here. But I agree with you. It is nothing new, and the idea of making it explicit is to go against usual opinions that the Antarctic program right now is, like heading to a clear direction. Anyways, it's a consolidated program, and that's important in many ways. So it's not one thing or the other, and it's like you said, it's more of the same in many ways. But I agree with you that something that could change that and put Brazil in a completely different direction is to have a grand strategy. And at least in what regard Antarctica, which is my field of study, we need to start thinking about Antarctica as an issue by its own, not as an issue of natural resources or maritime resources. Or it needs to be thought as Antarctica and the role that Brazil wants to play within. And that get me to the other 2 points that you identify as gaps in the book. The first one, you are completely right. The Diretoria de Hidrografia e Navegação should have much more space in the book. Probably it's a bias introduced by my political science background. But I said in several parts of the book that it was key in developing the Antarctic politics. So you are right. It should be bring to the fore, because actually when you look at Ferraz, Maximiano, they are all from there, and Becker, they are all from there, and they continue to be important to the Antarctic program, and probably Brazil wouldn't have an Antarctic problem if it was not because of the Diretoria. So you're right in that. About the lack of humanity and social sciences and what would be an Antarctic humanities, well, the Antarctic humanities is how we imagine and how we approach Antarctica, from imagination, which could be literature, as you said, cinema, and other. There are a whole field of studies on Antarctic humanities that are being developed, and there are great works. If you look in Argentina, they are looking at architecture in Antarctica. In Australia and New Zealand, they are looking at literature, films, etc. So that there's a lot of things in Antarctic humanities that could bring us some conscience about how we as a society, not only the government, but as a whole, imagine the Antarctic. as a region. And I think that needs to be done, and it's still vacant in Brazil. I mean, I'm from the social science, so I'm not the one to develop that, but it should be addressed, and we need to start thinking about those fields which are completely undeveloped in Brazil. And there is the Humanities and Social Science expert group, standing committee right now, which has been developed this work for a few years. And about the Blue Amazon, and I think that was the last one. I remember because we talk about that, and actually you gave a talk at USP once about the Blue Amazon, and you're right about the recent use of the concept of Blue Amazon. But if you look back, and I think I took that from some document, actually, they started to look before using the concept as a proper concept. They started to talk about the Blue Amazon before that. I'm not sure. I should look at it if it was from an archive or some book that I take the idea of Blue Amazon in the 1960s. But if it's not proper to talk about Blue Amazon, which could be the case, the idea of a Blue Amazon, not as a concept, a strategic communication concept, which is the way you analyze it, but the idea of the oceanographic space as a source of commodities was really strong in the 1970s, and it was what drove the creation of the CERN and all that. And that was my point, actually. But it may be right that I shouldn't have used the Blue Amazon because of the actual use of the concept. I will think on that. But still, you are right that my idea with this book was to set the basis for future analysis. So I think right now people who wanted to go forward, well, they have the references to go to archives, probably go to Brazil. As Daniela said, well, I did a lot of archival work. Well, now people can go there and do it better. They have the basis for doing that. So that's the idea, and to develop a field that it hasn't been developed yet. So that's the main idea. I think I cover most. If not, you could provoke me again or ask me again. Danny, well, yes, you are completely right about the revisiting the gender issue in the Brazilian Antarctic history, and some that I still feel that I have done little is to recognize the role of women in the Antarctic history of Brazil. Because when you start studying the Brazilian involvement in Antarctica, you see women. It's incredible. It's not only Teresinha de Castro, it's Edith Fanta, it's a lot of great women that have, push forward the program. You have Tania Brito. You have a lot of women who have been key in pushing forward the Antarctic involvement of Brazil. So I think that's another issue that needs to be developed further in Brazil. So you asked me if there is any parallel, or if I see any parallel about Brazil's policy with other parties. Well, I will not be, as I am a specialist on Latin America and Antarctic, I don't see any parallel. I mean, strictly speaking, there are similarities and differences, but Brazil has a very unique history in Antarctica, at least from my point of view. I don't know if any other party have a similar history, because I haven't studied other countries, but I think it's quite unique in many terms. Of course, it has parallel with India, with China, in some issues with Uruguay, but in some others it departs a lot, especially when you look after it gets into the ATS as consultative party, they started to depart much more because India have established more stations, China as well. They have more geopolitically based view on Antarctica in terms of the territorial extension of their presence. But about your question about what made Brazil be inside the ITF, it was its own efforts or not. I think it was both. So and that's something that I say explicitly in that chapter, because sometimes it is presented, the official discourse says, oh, we made this and this, and so we get accepted. So it's not the complete history, but at the same time, it's not, the other way around. It's both things at the same time. Brazil did his homework, but at the same time, there was an opportunity and it took it. So you need to be in a certain place to take the opportunity, and that was Brazil did, and that was the ATS did as well, to incorporate Brazil and China. But it was not that straight. When you look at China, the SCAR says, okay, stop, wait, it's not still time. You need to do better, and the same with the ATS. So there were limits to that. About the incorporation of the decisions of the ATS within Brazil, what I'm saying in the text about the commentaries is it was supposed to be this transmission belt. It hasn't worked like that. And if you look, at least for what I know, the process of introduction of those decisions is made usually by the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and sometimes the Environmental Ministry or any other ministry involved in the specific issue. But usually it has been the Ministry of Foreign Affairs who have done that. And if you look the commentary, which is quite amazing, is that it has been deactivated for many years. And it's supposed to be the main political, advisor of the presidency in Antarctic matters. So it says a lot about what Vinicius says of having a grand strategy. So about the Brazilian science as an instrument or not, again, it's not one way or the other. It's both things at the same time. Brazilian science have used the idea of the economic relevance of Antarctica to promote their own interest, which is not exclusive of Brazilian Antarctic science. It has been the case, and it's my PhD dissertation. It was the case with Antarctic science in general. But at the same time, that limits I think, at least as my personal analysis, it limits the potentialities of Antarctic science, Brazilian Antarctic science. Why? Because if you do not legitimize your work by itself, and you put it as a medium to another end, you are subject to changes in the relevance given to your work. And I think that it is time. I mean, Brazilian Antarctic science have get to a point when it could say, okay, we are important by ourselves. We are really well developed. We are doing an excellent work. It's very relevant. It puts Brazil in a place where it wants to be. I think that is something that it needs to be addressed in a different way and leave that instrumental role to the past. I understand why scientists did that, but I think we are in a place when we need to do it differently. And that takes us again to the issue of the economic factor. And I think it's the same case. When you talk with a lot of people within the people involved in Brazilian policy. They said that we are there because being there allow us to participate in the decisions, and participate in the decision will allow us to take advantage of the economic resources in Antarctica once the Antarctic be open to exploitation. I think that needs to change and to start, well, if that happened, we will look at that. But, Antarctica is important enough by itself. We don't need that economic, justification right now. What we need is to decide which role Brazil wants to play in the Antarctic regime, what Antarctic science could bring to Brazil in terms of knowledge, scientific development, economic development. If it could be the case, that would be great. But I think it not need to be the only basis for research. And that would mean to develop, again, Antarctic humanities and social sciences. And one of the problems we have is we don't have a specialist thinking on that, and developing knowledge in that, and giving basis for decision makers to take better decisions. So the policy for Antarctic had been discussed last year. We don't still know why they have decided, what were the basis for those discussions. And I think, it's in a way, it's a lost opportunity. That's my opinion. I don't know if there is any question you wanted to make, or some additional comment.
Well, I just want to thank you for addressing, at least from my side, the questions that I have brought to you, and the way that we engaged with your work and with your book. There is just another point that I think you also mentioned in your book, and I didn't comment about that. It is a political knowledge. I don't know if the word is knowledge, but a political debate around Antarctica. I think you highlight very well how much it's important to be in the parliament, this discussion on Antarctica, because it is something relevant for the country in general, and as everything important to the country, it must be there. And where would be that today? In CREDEM, or in other commission in the parliament. But you point out about that, the necessity of a more political debate as well involving in Antarctica, because it must be a democratic political involvement of the country there, and not simply an imposition of one or other institution, either a Minister of Foreign Affairs or a specific government, or even the Navy or other armed forces. So I think this political debate, this democratic political debate, is quite relevant here as well.
Well, thank you. I completely agree, and thank you for the comments. I'm not sure. Just let me check if there is any question within the audience. Well, I'm not seeing anyone. So if
quite a lot of praises of your work here, what's quite good. That means that the audience is also happy with it.
Thank you. Well, I want really to thank all of you, Professor Rafael, Vinicius, and Daniela. It has been great to have your comment, your opinions. I'm really honored that you enjoyed reading the book. One of the things that you always ask is, it is really interesting for me, but it will be interesting for other people, and I'm really glad that you enjoyed reading it, and that you find it at least an appealing work. Well, it won't be possible to thank everyone here, but of course, the Navy, the National Archives, the National Library, the Fundação Getúlio Vargas have been key to develop the work, the USP King's College and the NUPRI, which Professor Rafael leads, for the support. It has been really, really important. Well, my wife for, holding me together in this process. But well,
Sorry?
No, but well, it has been great to develop this and to see it to come to an end. So thank you very much for everything, and I hope everyone have enjoyed. And if you haven't done yet and you are looking at this and you wanted to, please give it a look at the book. And that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.